Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, Tony and I are breaking down the deer hunting gear that we are using for the 2024 season. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and their Camo for Conservation initiative, which is leading to a percentage of every sale of First Light Spectre camo pattern being given back to the National Deer Association. I just recently spent some time with the folks at the National Deer Association doing some good work on our Working for Wildlife tour just recently in Kentucky, which I talked about last week on the podcast, but I want to make sure my dates are right here. Let me see here. So that podcast that just came out where we talked about was on the 23rd. So today's episode is coming out May 30th, which means there is another Working for Wildlife tour event coming up this Saturday, June 1st in Pennsylvania on the Allegheny National Forest. So if this is the first time you're hearing about it, go to deerassociation.com/WFW. And that's where you can get all the details about our event this Saturday. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of different volunteer work on the National Forest, improving habitat for wildlife. So I think there's tree planting, there's invasive species removal, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to make a real tangible difference for deer and other wildlife. So cool stuff. Would love to see you there. It's going to be a good time. But today, what we're talking about is gear. Something we don't talk about a ton here on the podcast. Sometimes we do, but I'd say compared to some other places, we're relatively light on that stuff. So Tony and I are here today to walk through the specific choices that the two of us have made for the gear we're going to use this upcoming deer hunting season. So I want to talk a little about what we like, what we don't like, what categories of gear maybe we think matter more than most, where maybe we would suggest you can cut some corners and go budget friendly, while other places maybe it's worth a little extra investment. We'll kind of talk through our gear philosophies. I think I've got a certain approach which might seem kind of Luddite compared to some. So we'll talk about that and hopefully give everyone a few ideas of things to consider if you need to make an upgrade, or vice versa. Maybe the things we talk about today will make you feel very comfortable in sticking with exactly what you've got. Because I do think a theme of much of what we'll talk about here today is that in the end, gear doesn't matter as much as your hunting decisions, your choices, your work ethic, all that kind of stuff. So you don't have to spend a lot of money on this stuff, Tony. So how are you?
I'm good, buddy. I think that if you were to write an AI program or run this through AI and say, hey, search every deer hunting podcast for the month of May and find the word Luddite, there would only be one. You're the only guy using that word on a deer hunting podcast this month. I promise you that.
I'm always trying to bring something just a little bit different, Tony. And I got that one covered.
Yes, you do.
So last time we chatted on the podcast, for the main show at least, it was our book podcast, which again, speaking of unique things, we are probably the only deer hunting podcast that's reviewing books. But
this is true.
You talked about taking off for a Florida fishing trip. Have you talked about that on Foundations at all since, or do you want to give folks a quick update on how the trip went?
It was so fun, man. I mean, we did our first. I've never fished offshore in my life, I've never had the chance, and I never booked a trip or whatever. And so the first day we were down there, I got to go out with a buddy of mine, Tim Lewis, who's he writes a little bit for MeatEater, and he's written a bunch of bow hunting books. Just a cool dude. Him and his buddy took us out 23 miles offshore, and it was, so calm and just like so beautiful and such a wild experience. It was trolling, which, to me is like not my jam, but right. Out there I was like, we'll just do whatever you guys want to do. I wasn't going to be like, we're just going to go cast in the middle of the ocean, but we caught some mahi, we caught some kingfish, couple other things. And then we did a little bit of, my buddy I was with got very seasick, which is really unfortunate when in total, we went 40 miles to get out and into the ocean 23 miles out. So it was a commitment, right? And as soon as we got through the inlet into the actual ocean, he was just not doing well.
That is brutal.
Yeah, he was chumming up fish quite a bit. He was throwing up like crazy. And so that part was a bummer. And we eventually, after trolling for hours and hours and hours, they were like, do you want to just bottom fish and try to catch some stuff? I'm like, yeah, because I wanted that boat to stop. I didn't know if it'd be better for him or not. It was. But then we did that, caught a bunch of stuff on the bottom, lost a couple big groupers, lost a shark. Just so much fun, man. And then, the last couple of days, we had access to a canoe. We borrowed a canoe from Tim. And so we got to paddle out and fish the mangrove islands right from our house. And it's just, there's so much variety, and there's like so much to learn down there, and I just love how you can go out and net your own bait, catch fish, use them for bait. And just like, there's so many opportunities. And we ended up just randomly, when I was out netting some mullet for the hell of it to use for bait, seeing snook as we were waiting, big snook going, snaking through the mangroves in like a foot of water. And we got on a sight fishing deal with them and never landed one, but we only had a couple hours when we discovered it. I'm like, I would go back just to do that, because it was like, you're just creeping along there looking, and all of a sudden you see, it kind of felt like bow fishing. Yeah. Oh man, so it was, every time I go down there, dude, I'm like, I think I was meant to be on the saltwater. Like, it's just fun. So
yeah, I can relate to that sight fishing thing. We did a lot of that when we were down there, and doing it with the fly gear. So it's like bow hunting with a recurve while, sight fishing. I mean, it was super duper challenging, but we had that diversity too. We did a lot of trying for tarpon, which I talked about a little bit last week on the episode. We did some DIY bonefish fishing on the flats, and I hooked into one, broke it off. My buddy caught a couple little barracuda. That was sweet. We did some fishing up in like some marina, just like dock areas, and I hooked into some little tarpon there. Had like crocodiles and alligators swimming up on me while I'm fishing. So just like wild stuff. And then we got to fish the Tamiami Trail. You ever heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
That's like a big canal system that runs along a highway that crisscrosses the Everglades kind of area, and hooked into some of like peacock bass, largemouth bass, cichlids, like all sorts of wild South American species that are there now, which aren't supposed to be there. But
did you land a peacock bass?
My buddy did. I did not. Yeah. For whatever reason, I was getting all the largemouth and he was getting the peacock. But yeah.
What were you getting those on?
Just like little bright pink or fire tiger streamers.
Yeah.
Just casting them out there to structure and stripping them in as fast as you can.
I bet a little fire tiger streamer looks like a little peacock bass minnow.
Probably, yeah. I think that's what you're looking at. So, yeah, a lot of diversity, a lot of fun.
So I saw you posted about camping down in the Everglades. How was that?
Yeah, man. I mean, the Everglades are awesome, but I think that there was a reason why when we pulled into the campground down at this area called Flamingo, which is the southernmost tip of the landmass there of the Everglades National Park, we pulled in. It's a national park, and there's nobody in the campground. I mean, like one other tent maybe, and never once in my life have I arrived at a national park campground and have nobody else there. And at first I'm like, man, this is awesome. And then very quickly like, why is this? Lots and lots and lots of mosquitoes.
It's amazing down there, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it was a really cool place, but you didn't want to be out when the wind died down, especially as the evening progressed. We were making our coffee and eating breakfast in the tent, right, and running in and out of it when you had to. But dude, it was worth it getting to see it.
It's just the Everglades, like you said, they are cool. I remember back when I was doing a lot of work with Tom Miranda, who has hunted everywhere. He lives in Florida, but he's hunted, he's got the world slam. He went way beyond the super slam, And I asked him one time, I was like, what's the most inhospitable, just horrible environment you've ever been in? He's like, it's the Everglades. He's like, it's just, if they dropped you off in the middle of there, you would just want to kill yourself in like an hour. I'm like, wow.
It's amazing what bugs can do to your psyche.
Oh.
That's for sure. We did get to see it in one way, which was very unique and very cool. We got to go on an airboat tour. with the chief science officer of the Everglades Foundation. And so we got to take this tour of the area from an airboat, getting to go way back in there, and getting to see a whole bunch of different things, and then learn from someone who's incredibly well educated about the landscape, the environment, and various water quality things going on there. Really insightful, really interesting, and you get to see the beauty of the place that's hard to appreciate from the road. Unless you're able to get out there on the water and get back into the backcountry, you can't really see much of the Everglades from the road because it's just kind of like grass or tall mangroves and stuff. But when you got in there, you get to see the diversity of it. There's these, there's the sawgrass flats, and then there's the higher ground islands with mangroves or different things. And then there's actually big tree islands where there's like cypress trees and different things going there. So very, very cool. And definitely a place I want to keep going to. But the waters surrounding it are what really, really got my heart. Florida Bay, Biscayne Bay, the Keys, all that stuff is just special. So
Dude,
return trips are in order.
That environment, you've never hunted down there, have you?
Nope.
It is, as I get older and I'm like, give me hills. Like, I just like hunting around hills and in the hills and bluffs and whatever. You get down there and you start walking through those like cypress swamps and like everything is just like pancake flat. And it's such a different navigation experience because there's no high ground whatsoever. Like the high ground's like 6 inches higher than the flooded stuff. It's such a weird environment, but it's cool.
That's the truth. That is the truth. So, gear. Main topic for today. It's gear. Like I said at the top, I don't think we've done an episode like this, the two of us, in a long time. If we've ever done it, it's been a long time since doing it because I can't remember it. So, how would you rate yourself, like on a gear junkie level? Do you feel like you nerd out on gear pretty hard, or where would you put yourself on that scale from like 1 to 10? Let's say 10 is gear junkie, tinkerer, and a 1 is someone who just goes out there with something they got from Grandpa 55 years ago.
I'd say probably right now I'm at like maybe a 6, and I say that partially because for my job for like 10 years I had to be a 10. I mean, when I was equipment editor for Bowhunter TV and Bowhunter magazine for a long time, and my entire job was like comprised of just getting gear in, testing it out, and they wanted you. I mean, sometimes if you might just test something in your yard, right? If it's a bow, you might just be shooting it with the Hooter shooter or whatever. But mostly they wanted you to hunt with it, and so it was a real eye opener to me about how brand loyal people get and how. If somebody uses a broadhead, let's say, in 2003 and they have a good year with it, they might stick with that broadhead no matter what, regardless of whether it's changed hands, 9 times and been bought and sold and the materials are different, the designs are different. And so it was kind of like, it taught me that there's some stuff that you should definitely, if it works for you, stick with it. Like some stuff's not really changing, but there are a lot of components and a lot of things that we use that evolve over time, and they're not the same thing they were before. And you get new options, generally every year. And so you kind of have to be like that old school, I'm sticking with this, but also have an open mind for some new stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point. And I'll say, when it comes to me, I'm more of like a 3 or 4 as far as being a gearhead. Like I've come to understand, like I need to specialize in certain ways, and I specialize. Like my skill set I bring to the table is strategy, is understanding deer behavior, deer movement, landscapes, hunting tactics. That's like my place. Like I'm an idea person, I'm a communication person. Conceptual things work well for me, but I am not a maker, a fixer, a do anything with your hands, a numbers guy. All of that stuff doesn't click easy with me. And so that's translated to gear stuff. Like I'm not the person who can tinker with my stuff and do all this little fine-tuning things and tweak and fix and adjust. My mind just doesn't work that way. It's incredibly frustrating for me to try to do that stuff. So the way I've approached my gear choices is that I have offloaded, like outsourced a lot of that to people who are experts, to people who are that kind of person. and I will find someone I trust on that front and have them help me make the right decisions on some of these things, or find something that I trust and that has worked consistently and that works with my style and my goals, and then I'll stick with it. Yep. So there's a lot of stuff, like for long periods of time, I will not change my gear. Even if there's some new, latest and greatest, whatever, as long as it's not inhibiting my success, if it's something I trust and it's something I know that works with my style and goals, I'm not going to keep on upgrading to try the brand new thing. I want to trust something, and then I want to forget it, because there's only so much space in your brain, right? Like there's this like brain attic analogy that some people talk about. Like there's only so much space in your brain for stuff, and if you keep on piling more and more things, you're going to have to send something out the door. You can't just continue to add more and more. Your brain doesn't expand to fit everything in the world. It's going to have to remove something else. And I have learned that I'm going to save as much space as possible for the conceptual, strategic things, and then let somebody else or make quick decisions or long-standing decisions with gear, so that I've got more processing power for the stuff I'm actually good at. Yeah. So that's how I approach it.
Can we talk about that for a second? Because I think there's a perception out there, and maybe us doing this podcast makes us hypocrites. But when I got hired in the hunting industry, all I cared about was the hunting part. Like I was not into gear at all. I'm like, I just need to get 20 yards away from deer. It's like, that's my thing. And what you realize when you kind of peek behind the curtain is a lot of the people who are making hunting content, they don't have to worry about the scouting as much. They don't have to worry about finding spots as much. And so it's just a natural thing. Like it's like the Joe Rogan thing, right? Like if you listen to Joe Rogan talk about hunting, he talks about shooting his bow like crazy and getting really good at that, and then killing elk. And there's nothing in between there, because that's offshored to the guides and outfitters where he's hunting. And so to him, that gear part is huge, because the scouting, finding places to hunt, figuring that stuff out, he didn't have to do that. And that's a lot of people in the hunting industry. And so I remember arguing with my first editor about that, where I was like, we are putting like a huge emphasis on gear, like you got to have the best. And I'm like, but most people just it would be more beneficial for them to just concentrate on scouting and hunting. And then, you peek behind the curtain a little more, and you're like, well, of course they're going to push gear as well, because that's what's paying the bills, right? Like that's the relationship between making content and all these companies is we put it out there, people buy it, and that keeps the whole machine running. But if you're honest about it, the reality is you would be way better off, most likely, like you're talking about, being a 4 and just, and not obsessing over it. Cause especially in the whitetail side of things, Western hunting, I would view a little different, but whitetail hunting, I mean, there's some systems you kind of can nail down, like the saddle thing or a lightweight, tree stand, blinds, whatever. And then your shooting is like, you should work at it, but if you're not lighting them up at 80 yards, so it's like, where best to put your mental resources, like where best to put your time. And, I'm not saying like, don't buy some good stuff, because it helps, especially sitting out in the cold and being quiet. And like, there's benefits to good gear and understanding it, but we've been fed sort of I wouldn't say it's like a false narrative, but it's definitely like a heavily influenced narrative around gear that might not serve the average hunter as well as it seems.
Man, so true. And I think, like you said, we are doing a gear podcast, which might seem like we are emphasizing it. But on the flip side, man, we've done 783 podcasts or whatever it is, and this is one of a few, if any, other podcasts we've devoted to just gear like this. So, it's pretty rare for us to do one like this. And I hope that speaks to the point you're making, which is you don't need any of this stuff. You don't need the fancy high dollar stuff. You need a handful of things that you trust that can get the job done, but you don't have to get the brand new bow every year. You don't need to get the brand new set of camouflage every year. You don't need, if you're a new hunter, you don't need to show up on day one with the pack that you saw Tony using and the bow that you saw Giannis using and the optics that you saw on MeatEater or whatever. You don't need all that stuff. You don't have to spend a bajillion dollars to get started doing this or to be really good at doing this. There are very, very good hunters who are using equipment that is not going to show up on this podcast or any best of product reviews, right?
Right.
Don't let that keep you from getting out there and having fun.
Right. And I would say that there's actually, it's actually kind of a negative to switch quickly. Like the people, I mean, God bless the people who buy a new bow every year. They're keeping this whole thing running to some extent, but you know how it is. Like, you don't really know how something is going to work for you. A season might not be enough. 3 seasons might not be enough. And so to figure out, your system for, like if you get your arrow weights dialed and you can shoot, your broadheads seem to be performing and you're not freaking out, you're using your sight correctly. And like, there's some stuff that can stay pretty constant once you figure it out, but it takes time to figure it out.
Yeah, that's the truth. So I hope that's a good disclaimer as we start this. Like, the way I'm approaching this is like, here are the things that we use. Here's the thing like the stuff we're trying out, or here's the things we really trust from long-term experience. Here's some thoughts on it, but none of this, don't take any of this as an endorsement or as a, like, you have to do this too. Or if you don't have something like this, you're not going to have success. There's nothing I dislike. I mean, there are some things I dislike more, but there are a few things I dislike more than some hunting video where a guy shoots a buck and then sits next to it and says, I would have never killed this buck without my Hoyt, or whatever it is. That's so stupid. That's so ridiculous. You don't need any of this stuff. You don't need to have this specific brand. You can kill just as many deer wearing Sitka gear or First Light gear or Walmart camo. You don't need it. You could shoot a great buck with a bear bow or a Hoyt bow or a beginner combo from Cabela's, whatever it is. You don't have to spend all the extra money. Some things, like you said, Tony, do help out. Some things are worth a little more investment than others, but don't ever let it keep you from getting out there. Don't ever let it make you feel bad about what you're bringing to the woods. Don't stress about this stuff. Try to make good decisions. But most important is learning deer, learning how to hunt, learning terrain, and let the rest fall where it may.
And I would say, just to piggyback on that quick, when we talk about gear, when you see somebody in the industry talking about gear, it's almost always like framed to make you a more effective killer, right? Choose these broadheads because the wound channel is, nastier than the competitors or whatever. But what you find, and we'll probably talk about some of this stuff, is like you said, you don't, I've hunted with like probably 15 different bow models or different companies over the years and killed stuff with all of them. Like, you don't need a lot of that stuff, but there are products out there that can make your experience a lot better. And so I always look at it from the perspective, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but last year we've talked about this a little bit. I used that DSD doe decoy twice last year, and we killed 2 bucks with it. And it was like, that was one of those things where I was like, this is going to change the arc of my life, because decoys never heavily factored into my whitetail hunting. Like, just always an afterthought, never something where I was like, I'm building a strategy around this, because I never had any confidence in it. And we had those 2 experiences, and I was like, okay, this is going to change how I hunt for a long time, probably. Just kind of like getting good decoys in the spring changed how I bow hunt turkeys. So there's stuff like that, and the clothing thing too that you brought up. I will say that we push clothing really hard. That's big business, but living where I live, living where you live, there is a component of parts of quality clothing where they make the experience a lot more enjoyable if you're in nasty weather. So I always like, it's not necessarily like what's going to make you the best killer. Like what's going to help you enjoy your time? Like what's going to help you, say, I'm going to go today, even though the weather is going to be terrible. Or when you get out there, you're like, I'm going to sit till noon and not bail at 8 o'clock. I mean, there's a lot to consider there, but also just like maybe on the trail camera front, maybe on some of the stuff, like how can you just make it more fun? Like how can you kind of immerse yourself in it a little more? Is there something that's worth it for that part? Because I think that's a consideration too. Yeah.
I think those are good points. Let's jump into some stuff. Let's just start talking through some of these pieces that we've chosen to use ourselves. What category are you most interested in starting with, Tony? I'll let you kick us off with the category.
Man, I wrote about this the other day for a Foundations episode coming up. The thing that we got this spring that has me very excited for this fall is those image stabilizing SIG binos.
Yeah.
Man, I just, when you get them, you pull them out of the package, you're like, what are these things? Like they don't look like typical binoculars. And I took them turkey hunting and I was glassing and I was like, oh my God, like this is a different experience with optics than I've ever had. And even my daughters, like I'd hand them to my daughters. I'd be like, see that Tom in the corner there? And it's like everybody I've handed those to has been like, wow, like this is like a shift in how we glass. And so on the optics category, like I think that's an interesting development.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're talking about the SIG Zulu 6 binoculars, which have this built-in image stabilization that you can turn on and off. And you're right, it's crazy. And I had a similar experience. I got these last year in the summer, I think. And I looked at them and I'm like, I'm not going to use them. Like I really like my Vortex binos. And man, I love Vortex people. I love the company. Like I for a long time have just been like a Vortex fan. Like great folks, great products, great warranty. I could rave about that, and they're a great choice, and would recommend them to anyone. So I was resistant to switch at all, and actually felt like guilty about trying something different, like I was cheating on a girlfriend or something. But I finally had a friend, our buddy Justin, who was like, dude, you really need to just like take these out in the field and actually try them. It's going to change your world. And again, like I typically don't think gear is going to do that. But I took him out on a hunt for the first time in October, I guess it was, on the back 40, and flipped these suckers on and was like, oh my gosh. Like it goes like, the typical handshake that you have when you're freehanding binoculars is gone. It's like your binoculars are on a tripod, but you're hand holding them, even with one hand. So I ended up finding is I just had to use them. I couldn't not use them because they made such a big difference. Like when you're hanging from a saddle and you're holding your bow in one hand and you're trying to get eyes on this buck that you see that's back in the brush and you can just kind of see stuff. Like when you're trying to handhold with regular binoculars, there's micro movements that are happening that keep you from really being able to see clearly. As soon as you turn these suckers on, it's like magic. And all of a sudden you can pick everything apart. It works better in low light. It works better in situations where it's windy or where there's trees moving and you're moving. It works better when you're trying to like pick apart something that's behind tree branches or something. I can't tell you how big of it. It's the first like optic related thing that I've been like wowed by in maybe ever.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know. I don't know if the benefit, because I think about those from the perspective of a whitetail hunter. I don't know. I'm sure there'd be benefits there to Western hunting too. But when you were talking about that, you think about how often you're saddled up or you're in your stand and you just catch movement through the woods and you have like a 5-second window to see what's going on. And it's different than like scanning a mountain basin and trying to pick out a bedded mule deer, or it's like, you need to be able to pick up as much information as possible in the cover within seconds, because that opportunity is going to go away. And so I'm so curious about that for whitetails, because think about how often you walk in, saddle up, do that, and you see one goes through somewhere, and or maybe they're feeding under some under an oak tree or something, and it's just like you just little glimpses of them, but that's where you should be tomorrow or tonight. And you like any little piece of info that you can glean out of that is going to help you make that decision. I'm like, that it seems crazy, but those optics will probably help people kill more deer.
Yeah. It like eye-opening difference in how helpful it was in the whitetail woods last fall. And I'm just like I explained my perspective there. I was resistant to this, and it's undeniable from my experience last year. Like I had to use them. So yeah, those are the same ones I'm using this year again. Really impressive, very cool. The SIG Zulu 6, and I had the 16x42s Do you have the 16 by 42s, or there's like a smaller version?
I have the
or
smaller
lower
version.
Yeah. So as far as that's the those are the binos I'm using as well. I've historically been using a Vortex 4000. I think it's the Ranger 4000 rangefinder. I do think that I'll be testing out a SIG rangefinder this year, but I can't speak to that yet because I haven't used it.
Yeah, I haven't
But
either.
that's optics. Any other things on the optics side that you particularly like or love or want to touch on?
Man, I've been using a Vortex spotter the last 2 years. Such a good product.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I mean, I was using like Wally World binos, that my dad would go buy, little tiny, 6x30s or whatever. And I just never, until I started going out west, I never really appreciated optics a whole lot. Even like scouting in the summer, we used the worst, cheapest stuff. And now maybe it's partially because I'm hunting with my kids a lot. So I'm like stuck in one place a lot, but the right optics are really important. And I think we've kind of, I wouldn't say we've moved on from that category with trail cameras, but we've definitely, there's like a subdued importance to optics now that we run cameras so much. Everybody's carrying binos into the woods with them to hunt, but how, like, you go out shed hunting, you go out in the summer, you got binos on your chest, like think how often you sit there and look through that spotter, just because you can learn so much more than you can, or so much different than just running trail cameras. And so the optics category to me it's pretty important.
Yeah. So speaking of optics and speaking of always having binos on your chest, I'm not going to specifically say that you need to run the bino harness that we use. You don't. But I would just make a strong recommendation to use a binocular harness of some kind. Because for years, I just had my binos on like a shoulder strap.
Right.
And I would just like sling that over my shoulder and carry it out there. And you're hiking and that thing's bouncing around, or if it's hanging off your neck, bouncing around and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. When I look back on that, it was so... I don't know. It seems antiquated or something, but man, when
Luddite.
I finally started wearing, Luddite. When I finally started wearing a harness, like a chest pack, when it keeps it tight to your chest and you can put other accessories on it, man, I mean, what a great organizational and like, it changes a lot about how you act in the woods when you have certain things very easily accessible, compact, tight to you, that don't impact your draw cycle, that don't impact your ability to belly crawl or climb a tree or anything like that. I don't care what brand you use or try. I would just, my big suggestion is if you're not already using a harness, a bino harness, try one, because they make a big difference. And for too many years, I didn't use one, and that was a big mistake. We use the fob from FHF is what you and I use, which we love it. It's great system. There's plenty of other options out there too, but that's one thing I would recommend you get. Even if it's the $25 Walmart one, that's better than using a neck strap.
So I'll say just one thing on that. We're primarily talking to bow hunters here. Pay attention to the closure system. I don't care which one you go buy, but there are bino harnesses out there that use Velcro. Like higher end ones. I mean, there are bino harnesses out there where you would never want to have those with a deer 20 yards away or 50 yards away or whatever. And so I would say, just if you're a bow hunter and you're looking for a bino harness, at least make note of how it closes, how it opens. Is it a zipper? Is it magnets? What is it? Because that's going to factor into every single hunt and every single glassing trip. And I will never forget, I guess it was probably 5 years ago now, but I had a company send me a bino harness, and this is a good company. I like their stuff a lot. They dipped into the bino harness world and it had Velcro. So I'm like, there's no way you're going to use this. I mean, I can barely imagine rifle hunters using that. And, so I would hate for somebody to go out and just be like, well, that's a good brand that looks like every other bino harness out there. I'm going to buy it. And then you get home and that's the situation. So at least pay attention to that.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I really like the magnetic closure that we've got on ours. Mm-hmm. Super silent, but firm. Something to consider. Okay. What about what we hunt out of, like stands or saddles or anything like that. That's a big one. There's always lots of debate. When it comes to tinkerers, people really like to tinker with their mobile hunting setup. Let's talk stands, blinds, saddles, all that kind of stuff. What kind of choices are you making on that front, Tony?
I'm using the tethered saddle. I'm using the Timber Ninja sticks, going light, light, light. You know, it's such a good system.
What saddle specifically is it, and what version of those Timber Ninja sticks?
Well, the Timber Ninja ones, I think they're the 24-inch. They're the little bit longer ones.
Just the 24-inch C1s, I think.
Maybe. And then I have several saddles. I use the smallest one. I can't remember what that one's called.
The Phantom or the Mantis, maybe. The Mantis was the first small one, and then they had the Phantom, and then they had the Phantom Elite that was in Spectre camo.
Yeah, I think I'm using the Phantom, but I can't remember. I've used quite a few of them, but that system, just from, and I mean, I know we've talked about this a ton, but it's just so convenient. It's so easy to use, and when I hunted with Steve last year, he didn't want to saddle up. And so I'm like, okay, I got to bring stands, but it was like middle of the season. And so I had to go buy some stands and try to find some lightweight stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you just realize, like at home on a farm that I have for mission, it wouldn't even matter to me. I'd strap on one of those stands to my pack, carry some sticks in, whatever. But down there, walking in and setting up, it was like, man, this is not the system for this kind of hunt. It just becomes very obvious. And so there's like a time and a place for those. But I don't see a reason yet. I haven't seen anything come out where I'm like, I need to change that mobile setup right now,
Yeah. What platform do you use? A platform?
Yeah.
And if so, which one?
The tethered platform. Yeah.
The tethered metal one, like the original Predator?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm using something really similar. I'm using the tethered Phantom Elite, which is not their newest one. Their newest one, I can't even remember what it's called. The Lockdown, I think. And that one's like a little bit bigger, kind of like the more comfort focused model. It's got like the double panels and all that kind of stuff. That looks great and looks comfortable, but I'm kind of like you. Like I want to be more minimalist, lightweight, less coverage. I'm perfectly fine and comfortable in it. So I've not been using the top of the line one. I'm using that second one. I'm using the Predator platform, but they came out with a carbon one last year. So it's the Predator CFX, and I started using that. And that's really slick. It's a little bit bigger actually. Well, I take that back. I think there's two versions. There's like the regular size, and then there's like the slightly bigger size. And the one that was available first was the larger size. So that's the one I have. But I think it was the only one available at that time when I got it. What I like about it is quieter. Like the one downside to the original Predator was it is metal. So you had to really tape it up good if you wanted to try to prevent any kind of possible metal on metal contact. This new one, carbon fiber, much quieter. It's lighter. So even like that bigger size weighs, I think, a little bit less than the regular sized metal one. Yeah. And then finally, which is a pretty sweet thing, there's like a footstep on top of the post. So do you know how the post of a platform, right? Your platform comes off the bottom, and then there's a vertical pole, and then there's the top teeth that bite into the tree. Well, now there's a little like footrest on top of that post, because what a lot of people do, and what I've done too, is like you stand on top of that post to get a little bit of additional height sometimes, or additional pivot angles to move around the tree in different angles, or to get a different view. And now there's actually a little wider spot for your foot to step onto that, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, carbon fiber is so badass. The only downside to it is it's so expensive.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a consideration, no doubt. With those sticks that you mentioned too, those
so
sticks
expensive.
Are expensive, very expensive. Really nice,
right?
But very expensive.
I would say, I mean, obviously I feel like that's like a buy once, cry once situation, because they're going to last a long time. And, you use them a couple seasons and you amortize that out a little bit. You're like, okay, well, it's not so bad. But man, they're not giving away carbon fiber stuff.
I do think like this is one of those places, like to your point, like if I'm going to spend some extra money on something, this would be one of those categories I would spend it on, because it's, it's not like back in the day when you had to buy like 15, 20, 30 tree stands if you want to hunt a bunch of different properties and have a lot of spaces covered. Now you can just buy one mobile setup, and that's 15, 20 tree stands right there, because you can go and use it 1,000 different times over every different property you hunt, right? You just need one. So it's a high bang for your buck kind of product in that it gives you a lot of use cases with it. So you mentioned those Timber Ninja sticks, which were my favorite stick for a number of years because they're carbon, they're quiet, they're lightweight, all that good stuff. They have the built-in aider on a lot of them, which is really nice too. And I was using those last year. But something that you told me about them a few years ago was that you had like some creaking sounds of them a little bit, right? They make like a weird kind of creak sometimes. And that's something I noticed, but kind of just dealt with. And then sometimes, at least with the way I was attaching them to the tree, I was using like a daisy chain, what am I looking for? Basically a daisy chain. I'm having like a brain fart. I can't think of the word here, Tony, but whatever. You throw this daisy chain rope around the tree, tie it off. It would lead to not absolutely rock solid connection to the tree. You'd attach it and you have to pull it down to get it secured, right? And I don't know if you've ever had this with yours, but sometimes those bottom parts of the sticks will want to kick out if you've got your weight on there just a little bit wrong. So me and my cameraman, Charlie, went in to hunt a spot in late October, and it was like one of those mornings where you're getting set up, you're going way up high in the tree, it's not daylight yet, you got heavy packs on, all that kind of stuff. And I just remember it was like just like a dicey, just felt like a little bit dicey getting the tree. You really had, like, we had our lineman's belts on, so we were safe, but it was just like a challenging setup. And we're in the tree, and I think Charlie, my cameraman, had felt even a little bit more sketchy than me, because one thing I do is I've got very long legs, and so I've got big gaps between my steps to try to get up high. So I think he had to really lunge to get up, and he must have had one of these moments where the stick kind of pivoted out on him or something, because we're sitting there quietly, sitting there waiting for deer to show up and stuff. He's like, dude, you really need to try my tethered one sticks. I don't want to die on these Timber Ninjas. I will give you my one sticks. Please try them. Because he was saying they're like a lot more rock solid. Like he swore to me that I would like them, and I had been resistant. I actually had some that our mutual friend Josh had given me. So I'm biased in that my best friend works for this company now, but I hadn't used them.
Ouch.
Yeah. Sorry, Tony.
Oh, I didn't see that coming. Okay. All right.
So, save your tears for later. I didn't want to use them because the knock on them that I always felt was that out of the box, they are loud. They don't have a quiet outer, like it's metal. The sticks are metal. And so the way around it is that you have to put tape or stealth strips or something on the posts of these sticks to make them quiet. And I always thought that seemed, I don't know. I didn't like the fact that you had to do that. If I'm buying a big fancy set of sticks, they should be quiet right out of the box like the Timber Ninjas are. So I had been resistant to try them. But Charlie's like, you got to try them, man. They've got, just trust me on this. So we go out for the next hunt. He gives me his sticks, and they're stacked all really nicely together. They've got this tab system, these little rubberized tabs that fit into each other, and they lock all four of your sticks together like perfectly. I had used, there've been like little clips on the Timber Ninjas that I've used in the past, and I used my own like rubberized Night Eyes strips to hold them together and different things, but those are often like not perfect. They'll fall apart sometimes, they'll get loose sometimes. This tab system on the one sticks, I mean, it's fail-proof. It's rock solid and silent popping them in and out. And then they're just as lightweight as the Timber Ninjas. And they have a rope attachment system with a very easy, like there's this tab on the front that's got 4 cutouts on it, and you just do a figure 8 with a rope through it. It takes half a second. You don't need to know any special knots, nothing. So long story short, I tried them the next day. He had them taped up. He had the stealth strips on them, and they were rock solid on the tree. They were rock solid when they're attached to each other, and they're so lightweight, I could take the full stack of 3 or 4 of them, clip them to the side of my saddle and climb up the tree with all 4 of them hanging together. Versus with my Timber Ninjas, I would have to separate them. So I'd have one stick on the left hip, one stick on the right hip, one stick on the back. Now all 4 were on my right hip, rock solid together, and then you just pop them off, just like doop, they're off, silent, hook them on the tree. So I was convinced there. So I'm now using the tethered 1 sticks, but you have to tape them or put stealth strips on them. You can buy special stealth strips sized to them. So if anyone from Tethered is listening, you should sell them quiet. They put something on them from the, like, I would pay the
call
extra.
Your best friend, buddy.
He knows this too. So, and I gotta believe, like, Tethered knows this. Like, the guys there know it. I don't know why they're not selling these with a fabric out. There must be some reason. I don't know what it is, but charge $10 more or $20 more and give me them silent out of the box, because they're the best thing I've tried yet. But you're tacking on 20 minutes of inconvenience in the front end. Still, they'd be the one I'd recommend, given that. But yeah, small complaint.
Isn't that amazing how? Because when you were talking about that, and some of the sticks kicking out on you. I mean, I used Lone Wolf sticks for a long time, and I liked them. They worked pretty well. They locked together, but I had that happen. And those are longer than the sticks we're talking about. But I had a few instances. Like I had one where I shot a buck in Oklahoma, like 3 minutes left in the trip. We were driving home that night. Like one of those, just like he just showed up, killed him. And I'm like, okay, now I have my work cut out for me, because I got to get this deer cut up, because of CWD regulations. Like we already had camp broke down. So I was scrambling down my tree to go look at this deer, and it had snowed earlier in the trip, and it was all melting off. So everything was super muddy and wet. And so my boots were kind of muddy, but I hit the bottom step and it kicked out on me and I went right to the ground. But I was only 2 feet off the ground to begin with. But it was like one of those eye opener moments where you're like, man, sometimes you get too comfortable with this stuff, going up and going down, and like just that little movement. If that happens, and I had a lineman's belt on too there, so it was like just an awkward, stupid little 2-foot fall. Yeah. But you think about that, like that stuff, when it goes wrong, goes really wrong a lot of times.
Yeah, not worth it. Not worth, especially definitely not worth getting lazy and not using a lineman's belt.
Right.
When you're going up and down, or a safety strap, rope, whatever it is. If you're using a tree stand, like, please be safe. Please wear your harness or your saddle or something to keep you secured in the tree and when you're going up and down. For that reason, like, I do really like having, so I've got the 8mm rope lineman's belt from Tethered and the Rope Man Ascender, which is just this little tool that makes it very, very, very easy to adjust the length or add slack. So you can tighten your lineman's belt or add slack with like just a pull of the fingers. Makes it very easy to use a lineman's belt. And if you make it easy and convenient, you're not going to be tempted to say, well, I'm just not going to wear it. I'll just climb right down. So I do recommend that.
And on that note too, we should talk about something that I feel like changed my entire view of tree stand hunting, is just lifelines. And like, there's still people not using them. And I'm like, man, if you have a place where you're setting up stands, where you're returning to them, you should be using lifelines. And if, you talk about taking Charlie into a tree with you, like if you're taking people, or you might send somebody to your stand, even a ladder stand, because this, you know how it is. Like you talk to people and they're like, well, I only use ladder stand, so I don't use a safety harness, or I don't use a lifeline. But then you look at the statistics of who falls out of tree stands, and half the people who fall out and die fall out of ladder stands. And it's like, because they don't think they need the safety equipment. And lifelines, if you're not using those, and you could be, like, you're making a mistake. Like you should be using those. It's such a good addition, like such a good safety component of aerial hunting.
Yeah. So speaking of non-saddle stuff, do you have a tree stand or a ladder stand or a mobile hunt stand? Like if you're going to use something like that, you are choosing to use?
Man, I'm still using those little Millennium M60s. I just love those suckers. It was just such a simple, good design. And it, 8.5 pounds. I mean, they're tiny platform, because you're going to sacrifice somewhere. But if I'm going on a rut hunt and I'm sitting all day, because I don't like to saddle up all day, that's too much for me. but those, so then I'll bump up to those M60s, but also when we're always filming. And so I'm always carrying one of those for my camera guys, even if I saddle up, because they're just generally more comfortable in a tree stand. And I love those suckers. I don't even know if they still make them. I haven't checked in a while, but that they did that one right.
Nice. Yeah, I've not used those before, but they do look slick.
I filmed with Dylan Lentz in North Dakota last year, and I think I think it was an XOP stand, a little, and I was looking at it in my truck and I was like, man, that's like very comparable to the Millenniums I'm using. Different seat, like different design, but there are some good, super lightweight options out there. So even if you took that and paired it with, non-carbon fiber sticks, whatever. So you're talking, you can still get safety harness, safety equipment, tree stand, and sticks for probably sub 20 pounds. And so, if you're more comfortable with that setup or whatever, and that would be considerably less cost than, going the saddle, carbon fiber sticks route. So there is an option there. And I used that setup for a long time and killed a ton of stuff with it. So I still cling to the stands a lot because they come in real handy. So I like those.
Yeah. Yeah. I've not bought many tree stands in recent years because I just haven't added a lot of long-term properties to my mix. Like when I've got a property that I'm hunting year after year after year after year, those are the places where I put, more permanent setups up.
Right.
And for years, I would just buy the cheapest stands at the store. So it'd be like the $50 tree stands. Put a lot of those up over the years. More recently though, I've used a few of like the stands from Summit, like the bigger, more comfy ones. And in a situation where you're putting it up and leaving it for the season, that's kind of nice. So I've got a couple of those that are like a bigger platform, comfier seat, and yeah, I'm not using that a whole lot, but it's a nice little luxury to have in a place that you can just leave it hanging.
Right.
So something to keep in mind. Also, like I've got one ladder stand, literally one ladder stand, but every time I go hunt that spot, I kind of love it. I'm like, man, this is comfy. This is kind of really nice.
I know. I only have a couple out on some of the properties I own, and I'm the same way. I almost never sit them, but when I do, I'm like, oh, I get it. Yeah, this makes sense.
It's like a lazy boy.
Yeah, it's awesome. Can we talk about blinds?
Yeah.
So I did an interview for June with this fellow named Will Jimeno, who's a 9/11 survivor, badass bow hunter. And we've been talking about turkeys a lot. So we didn't talk about this on air, but he's trying to kill a bird out there in New Jersey with a recurve. And so he's like, or recurve or longbow, I'm not sure, trad bow. And he was telling me how this bird he's been working came in and he was just sitting there ready to draw, waiting for it to walk in front of his window. And he said that bird just stopped and actually started backpedaling, like walking backwards. And I was like, man, what's up with that? He's like, I don't know. I wasn't moving. And I was like, well, what blind were you using? And I don't remember the brand, but he said, it's one of the see-through blinds. Those have gotten really popular. Yeah. Primos came out with those first, and now a bunch of people have them. And I'm like, the idea behind those blinds with that see-through technology on paper makes so much sense, but those blinds let in a lot more light. Yeah. And so if you go out and you just pop one of those up and you're like, on the edge of a field or whatever, turkeys, deer, you have to understand that it's not going to function the way pop-up blinds were designed to function. It's not going to be to that level. The whole idea behind it is to keep you in the dark. And then you wear black in there and you move slowly and you're just blended into the shadows, like being in the back of your garage on a sunny day, like people looking, they can't see in there. But you put that material that you're only supposed to be look out through, and you can, but it lets light in. And so you're in a totally different situation. I use them with my daughters, but what I do is I will really brush them in. So you can peek through the walls in some spots, but you're mostly still covered up and adding some depth there because it's a different thing. And the scent factor with those is vastly different. If you're in a non-see-through type of pop-up blind, you have a scent advantage. Like you just do generally, not like you can't get winded, not like it's, like they could get you, but you have like there's a boost there, but you get one of those ones, even if it's one or two of the walls that are the see-through material, then all of a sudden that advantage is diminished as well. So that's something to think about, because it looks so, you walk into Shields or whatever and you're like, that's a great idea for the kids. We can look out all over, but there's like, you're making a concession there,
So what, if you're using a ground blind, what's the model you're taking out there typically?
Man, I've been trying out a lot of different ground blinds the last few years. I've used everything from like the Cabela's, Muddy options, Double Bowl still makes great stuff. Zenic makes great stuff, super heavy, but really built to last. And I don't know if they're still making blinds or not. But I'm to the point now where I want something that's just like a little bit more built to last. So if you go look at the materials that blinds are made out of, they'll be either like kind of that plasticky, just, shiny, but it'll be lightweight, right? Like, and that's okay for some stuff. But if it has like some kind of canvas type of material to it, it's just like a little more weight to it, then that's what I'm going for. Because I want something that's like, because if I'm using the blind, I'm not carrying it in and setting it up to hunt today. Like I'm putting it out for my daughters to hunt all season long. And, just if it's cheaper and has that cheaper material, it's just no bueno.
Yeah. So I've used probably like almost every different budget pop-up blind out there. Like I've used those like Ameristep dog houses and all those different things. I'm a sucker for like the cheap piece of crap ground blind that I've bought 15 of over the last 15 years, They get ripped every time it snows. If you try to fold it up the wrong way, a pole pops, like everything can go wrong with them. And that's fine for certain situations. But I came across a ground blind that we now have used for the last year or two, a few years up at our Northern Michigan deer camp. And it's called the Cage blind. Have you heard of the Cage?
Mm-hmm.
And this sucker is heavy duty to another level beyond any other ground blind, pop-up blind I've seen. It is not like a mobile option. It's not for heading in. Are those
River's Edge?
Yes, I think they're owned by the same company as River's Edge. So they're really heavy. Like it's probably the bag to walk in there is like 50, 60 pounds, something like that. Like you are not walking this in deep with you. This is a, walk a short distance or driving on your four-wheeler or drop it off with the truck to a location and set it up for the season.
Because they have a metal frame, right?
Yes, yeah. It is a metal frame, and it is built to handle, I think it's 800 pounds of snow on top. So it's built to be like a full season long, no matter the wind, no matter how much snow, no matter what, this thing is going to hold up to it. And so our problem up north is that we'd always set up our blinds before the season, and then that first good snow would come through, and no matter how well we tried to support it, they would always be crushed. And then we get up there for hunting season, gun season, and our blinds are destroyed. So we set these suckers up, and they've handled everything we could throw at them so far. You can literally do pull-ups on the frame. It's that heavy. You can just go there and ream on it, and it's not going anywhere. So they're more expensive, but if you've got a situation like the one I just described, it might be worthwhile. They're not super mobile, like I said, but they're certainly more mobile than like a roto-molded plastic or metal or wooden built box blind, right? You can break it down in 10 minutes and take it to a new spot. So we're actually looking at probably getting more of those to set up there because it just works really nicely for that type of situation. We're going to leave it there for the full season, and it's got to be able to handle the elements no matter what, and we want to use it over and over and over again. So the Cage has been a nice option.
You know that some fitness, go hard type of hunter influencer out there is going to start talking about doing chin-ups while you're in the blind now and how you can get swole while you're waiting on a deer.
It's all about you getting the most bang for your buck with your time, right?
You can do chin-ups, you can plank in there, you can do a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, man, they need to change their marketing. That's their big new spin. All right, so we've talked about optics, we've talked about saddle stands, blinds. We're running out of time, but we could talk about bows and accessories. We could talk about firearms. We could talk about clothing. We could talk about calls, packs, trail cameras, boots. What one of those do you want to touch on, Tony? Well, maybe we'll go rapid fire here soon and just like touch off stuff really quick. But which one do you want to spend a little time focusing on?
Maybe like, bows are really popular, broadheads really popular. Those two categories people seem to really be interested in.
Sure. Well, how about we do this then? I will tell you where I think I'm heading with that, and then you tell me what you are doing on that, because I'm changing all those things.
Oh.
Yeah. And this is counter to what I just described at the beginning, which is me liking to stick with one thing and not change, which I've done for a while. But this year I'm changing almost everything with my archery setup. And this, if you listen to the podcast that you and I did at the end of last season, folks will be aware of this, but I've basically decided to take a new approach with my archery setup and kind of decisions to dumb it down, simplify, and eliminate opportunities for error. So in the past, maybe I was making decisions with my archery setup or shot decisions with how do I maximize opportunity? How do I get more shots? How can I get a more accurate, longer shot? How can I get more deer killed? And now I'm moving to a phase where I would like to, how can I ensure that I have fewer things go wrong? I've seen, as we've all seen, there's so many different ways shots can go wrong and things can go badly. And I have learned, I've killed enough deer, I've shot enough deer now that I've experienced the highs of having it go well, and I've experienced the lows of having it not go well. Many, many more times it's gone well than bad. But the few times it's gone bad, that low is so low that it almost outweighs all the good. Like I dislike the experience, the feeling, the consequences of a bad hit on a deer or a miss. I dislike that so much. Like that's 100 on a 1 to 100 scale of like intensity of emotion, while the success of something go right might be like a 90 out of 100. Like it's great, but I feel those bad things even more. So because of that, I am pulling in my max range. Like I'm not taking longish shots anymore, right? We talked about this. Like I've decided I'm going to try out 30 yards and in. So like close range shots only. I've shot a lot of deer between 30 and 40 yards, and plenty of them have gone well. A few of them haven't. And I've had a lot of deer that I've still successfully killed, but got kind of lucky. They jumped the string and I hit high, or they spun and I got lucky. It still worked out, but I don't want to get lucky. Like I want nothing but as guaranteed as you can get. So this year, close range shots and shots that, even if I make a mistake somehow, I will have my bow set up, my arrow set up in such a way that it'll mitigate the risk of something going a little wrong. And I'm also trying to be as quiet as possible to reduce the flinching, jumping, ducking that I've had happen a ton the last handful of years. Had a lot of deer jump the string on me, which has led to a bunch of less than perfect hits. So, switching my bow. I've switched back to Matthews because that's the quietest bow I've ever shot. I shot a bunch of Matthews that were just like super, super quiet compared to all the other rigs I've shot. So I've switched back to Matthews. I'm shooting their new Lift 33 bow. I've switched for many years. I shot a 5-pin sight. I always thought, man, I don't want to have to make an adjustment with my bow in the moment of truth. Everyone says, oh, you should shoot a single pin sight. You should adjust it. And I always thought, like, man, I don't like the idea of a deer coming in and I've got 10 seconds and I'm fiddling with my sight trying to adjust it to the range. But the flip side, and you've talked about this, is that with that single pin sight, it simplifies your sight picture. It makes it very, very simple. There's only one place to aim and you're locked in right in that thing. You don't need to make sure you use the top pin or bottom pin or whatever. There's again, reducing opportunities for error. So I'm switching to that, and it's especially useful given the fact that I'm not shooting long shots anymore. So I can set it at, right around 25 yards or whatever it is. I'll figure it out, and not almost have to move it ever. It'll always be there, and I know that if this deer is at 25 yards or 20 yards or anything within my effective range, my new smaller effective range, I'll be good. And so again, it's simplifying, it's dumbing it down, it's reducing these little 1% chance of error things because all those things add up. And then I'm also switching to heavier arrows and big fixed blade broadheads. So all of this is happening right now. I don't have this stuff all locked in. Like I've been in the process of acquiring these things, but it's not all set up. but that's going to be happening over the coming weeks. But I think I'm going to be switching to iron well broadheads. Giannis has convinced me to give it a try. I've talked to those guys over there, and an even heavier arrow. So heavier arrow, bigger broadhead, single pin sight, super quiet bow, 30 yards and in. Will be my new whitetail setup. And I will report back later in the summer as I get more and more time with that setup. But right now, that's the situation I'm working to build out, and we'll be locked and loaded by fall.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Feels like you're kind of adopting a lot of stuff that I've been talking about for like 15 years.
Well, here's the thing, Tony. For many, many years, I've done my best to resist and avoid anything you mentioned because it's led to a lot of weird shit happening in your life. So I'm trying not to have my life spiral in that direction, but somehow, I'm getting sucked into that force field somehow. I don't know why or how, but here I am.
I'll tell you what, that was a weird way to admit that I was right, Mark.
I'm not going to say I admitted it.
So that's interesting. Definitely. I mean, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I do firmly believe that most bow hunters would benefit from a single pin sight. Like I firmly believe that if you give it a good summer of shooting and then one season, especially in the whitetail space, you're not moving that sight a whole lot. And if you do most of the time, it's because you're sitting on a field edge and he's 33 yards and you have time to shoot him in the beans or whatever. But just that dumbing down of the sight window, simplifying that. And I know, your resistance to that is everyone's resistance to that, right? Like, oh my God, I don't want to move that in the moment of truth. I switched to that system in 2009. I don't know how many deer and Western critters and turkeys and stuff I've killed since then. It's a lot. And I think I've had like 2 times where I was like a little bit in panic mode to dial down and I killed both of those deer. So it's like, that's a good move. 30 yards and under, no brainer. Like I don't know what it is, man. Cause I'm like you, I've killed quite a few of them between 30 and 40, but it feels like the margin for error changes like disproportionately.
Yeah.
Especially you start pushing it to like 40 where, you sit in your yard and you shoot 40 all summer long and you're like,
no problem.
No problem.
Yeah.
But killing a deer at 40 is a different thing. And then, when you go out west and you're like, it's a gift to have an antelope or a mule deer at 40 yards, you're like, this is sweet, but whitetails are different. And so I think that's a great idea. The heavier arrows, do you know what you were shooting weight wise before?
It was, I'm going to get the number wrong. 530 something, maybe. I can't remember off the top of my head. I was shooting the Victory VAP, Victory VAP 350s, which I think are here. I've got pulled up here. Something like 7.8 grams per inch, and it was like a 30-inch arrow.
Yeah, I wonder where you were at. I mean, if you were at 530, you were at a pretty sweet spot already, I think. But I don't think it's a bad idea to go to increase your weight a little bit. What's with the broadhead switch? You not happy with what happened last year?
Well, it just goes back to I had historically shot expandable broadheads because I liked the idea of the larger cutting diameter. I liked the idea of big, huge blood trails. I like the thing is like the knock on expandables has always been if you hit the shoulder, they're not going to do well, right? But if you hit anywhere else, I've always thought you do better. And so I've always thought, man, I'm going to go with the expandable because they typically fly truer to your field tips. And if I can trust my expandable broadhead to fly right where my field tips are, I'm going to put it where I want it, and I'm going to have great blood trails, quickly dead deer, great situation. So I would rather have the best broadhead for 80% of where my arrow might hit versus, something subpar for like a 10% window of the body, right? If you hit a deer back with an expandable, I think it's oftentimes not a bad thing to have that big, wide cutting diameter if you happen to be going through something and maybe I can clip the liver or something because of this big 2-inch cut, whatever it is. That was my thought process. But, last year was the first time where I hit the shoulder blade, didn't recover a deer, and that just makes you think, man, there are again, it's down to like reducing opportunities for error. So if I with my expandable, I knew I'd be okay if I hit most of the region behind the shoulder. Even if I hit in the guts, I'd be okay. Even if I hit a little high or a little bit low, right? I'm okay. But here's this, decent chunk of real estate that if I do hit, I'm screwed. By adding this big fixed blade heavy broadhead, now I'm good even if I hit there. And it's big enough and enough cutting diameter that even if I do get that back shot, it's still good there too. So it's good back, it's good forward. It's going to cover up any possible mistakes as best as possible now. And so by tightening, I'm basically taking any little 1% gain I can get in reduced room for error. So the fixed blade gives me a slightly better chance of getting away an error if I hit the shoulder. The heavier arrow, same thing. The closer range gives me a better chance of not having that kind of error, so on and so on and so on. The quieter bow, reduced risk of a deer jumping the string. So I'm just trying to stack all these little things that will reduce my rate of error from like 5% to hopefully 1% or whatever it is, That's what I'm going for.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I totally understand it. I mean, the way that I've gone, I was really hardcore fixed for a long time, partially because I had to shoot a lot of the mechanical heads like 15, 20 years ago, and they were just not what they are now. Like materials wise, design wise, they just weren't as good. And so I tried them for a while when it was burning hot right away. And I was like, this is not the answer. Like these are not performing. I think they're so much better now. Like I think they're way different. And what you're talking about is like the argument everybody makes, right? Like I'm good for everything, but if I hit that shoulder, I'm screwed. And my thought behind that probably in the last like 6-7 years is when you piece apart a deer that you shoot and you look at how much lung and heart and, liver you have to work with, you have I think we are conditioned to shoot too close to the shoulder. Like, I really think that it's like kind of been ingrained in our culture for a long time that it's like right behind the shoulder. And then you see people talk about shooting the V. And I'm like, man, you have like this nice paper plate sized opportunity behind the shoulder, especially get a little quartering angle on there. And so I don't worry about the shoulder anymore. Like I'm shooting rages. They just freaking work for me. I just like for whitetails. I just really like them, but I'm also like conditioned to just stay away from that shoulder now. And I think that's a big problem we have, and it gets a little even muddier now. Cause when you look at some of the people making hunting content out there, the heavy arrows thing is big. The iron will type of broadhead thing is really big right now. The super well built fixed blade broadheads. So you're starting to see more frontal shots and you're seeing people run it through the front shoulder. And I'm like, man, I know you can get away with that, but like I don't think we should be endorsing that. Like, I think that's a personal choice. If you want to go out and hunt that way, go ahead. But I don't think we should be like, hey, I switched to this and now I can do this, because you're only seeing the highlight reel of that stuff. Like, I think you're much better off figuring out, how do I earn a close shot at a deer? And how do I put it 4, 5, 6 inches behind his shoulder when he's quartered a little bit away? And so, that just makes me nervous. Like that messaging in and of itself is good. Heavy arrows, sharp broadheads that aren't going to break down, great. But you still have a response. It's not giving you that's giving you a bit of leeway maybe on the shots you would always take, right. But it's not a green light to just be like, I'm going to push it the other way.
100%. Like I totally agree. And I want to be very clear. I'm making this switch to reduce a chance of error, not to increase opportunities. So I'm not taking more risky shots because of it. Definitely not. This is like in the off chance that somehow something happens wrong and the deer spins like happened last year, that, I've got a little bit of extra risk mitigation built in. So I think that's a key thing to point out. And thank you for mentioning that.
Well, and you know what? I know that you do this and I do this a lot too. And I'm trying to like untrain myself on this. I'm so conditioned to merping them every time I shoot them. And you're changing that shot situation by making that noise. And, some situation, like during the rut, he's cruising through there, we do it. We're probably more conditioned for it because we film a lot. So you're like, we got to stop them. We got to get them in frame, whatever. Like we have a little bit different consideration, but I feel myself like there's like a compulsion to always do that. You know, like when we started out hunting, when I started bow hunting, like nobody did that. You were just like, you just wait till they stop and you shoot them, or you shot them walking or whatever, you know, which maybe wasn't the best either. But now I find myself in situations where I'm like, I gotta stop them no matter what, even though sometimes they're already stopped or they're like feeding on acorns and they're not going anywhere. And so that's another consideration too. Because when you talk about, you know, deer duck in the string and now you stop them out there 35 yards and it's dead calm and that bow goes off, that deer's dropping. Like now you're dealing with a 8-10 inch drop. Like there's stuff to think about there too.
Big time. All right. We have 8 minutes left before I need to shut this down. So what I want to do is like rapid fire. I'm going to list a category. Tell me what you use and like a 1-sentence description of why you like it or why you chose that. Okay. And we'll go through a few more of these categories.
Sure.
All right. Firearm of choice.
I don't have a firearm of choice.
Well, you went muzzleloader hunting last year. You got to have chosen something.
I use a Thompson Center Encore that I had. You know, I don't have a. I'm pretty brand agnostic when it comes to like deer rifle. I haven't hunted deer with a rifle in, I don't know, 10 years. So sorry, I'm disappointing in that category.
It's all right. That's all right, Tony. I'm going to go with the CVA Scout 350. I bought it for $270 or something like that at a little gun shop in the middle of nowhere, southern Michigan. It shoots a straight wall cartridge, that 350. Right. And man, that is an awesome little gun for shooting and hunting in a place where you can't use a full-blown rifle. It's super accurate. It's easy. It's a single shot. It's quiet. There's no recoil. It's lightweight. It's like a little scout rifle. Man, I just love that thing. And it's great for my southern Michigan hunting, 150 yards and in. It was cheap. It's not fancy. It just gets the job done. What are you grouping with that? Like when you're getting ready preseason, 150 yards, you're shooting it. Oh, really? I don't know. I mean, at 150 yards, relatively tightly. I'm not a crack shot. Like I'm an average marksman. So, but yeah, like 150, like 100 yards. It's like, like a big silver dollar kind of thing, something like that. Silver dollar, maybe. So good enough for me.
Yeah. One of my buddies has one of those and he's like, man, they're freaking great.
Yeah. It'll be the gun that my kids use when they first start hunting because there's nothing to it. It's not a crazy loud sound. There's no crazy recoil. It's good. How about grunt tubes?
Well, running Phelps.
Which one though? Which one would you use?
I use that Omega a lot, man. I'm not like super picky on my grunt tubes. I don't use them very much, but I always have one with me.
Yeah. I historically had used a buck roar back in the day. Mm-hmm. The call that we got a couple of years ago that I got to be involved with a little bit with feedback on was the Phelps Beta Pro. And that is my favorite now. I like that deep sound. It's got the rubberized tube. I like that one. Trail cameras.
Man, right now I'm running Moultrie, the Edge, the new ones. I've got some Tacticams out there. I have some Exodus. I'm actually using a bunch of non-cellular Exodus cameras right now because I don't need like up-to-date information this time of year. But I'm messing with those three quite a bit.
Yep. Historically, I use Bushnells and Moultries and Exodus a lot. More recently, it has been Moultrie and Tacticam. And the ones I've used the most were the Tacticam Reveal X2. Mm-hmm. Use that a lot. It just freaking works. And now this year, I'm also going to be testing those Moultrie edges like you talked about too, which I don't have experience with that specific model yet, but I do have experience with the app that I used last year and the year before with older model Moultries, and I did like this like AI built-in ID feature where it will filter your photos based on if there's a buck in it, if there's a deer in it, and a turkey in it. That is a really nice thing for sorting through many, many pictures when you're trying to check them.
Yeah, man, those Tacticams are great. I ran a Moultrie Edge last year in northern Wisconsin, and I really liked it. Like I I was like, this is working pretty good. And so that's what I have out right now. I actually ran one through turkey season. I have one over in Wisconsin, running on one of my food plots just for the hell of it. It's, it's amazing what that category has turned into. Like the options, the low to mid priced options we have now in the cellular trail camera category is just incredible. And they last, and they've, I don't know, it's wild to me just how quickly that changed and evolved.
Very true. Boots.
Man, I like lacrosse, the Alpha Burleys. I'm, knee-high rubber boots I live in for whitetail hunting, and I have a hard time leaving lacrosse. They just make good stuff.
Yeah, man. I started wearing lacrosse boots when I was 15, I think, and I have been using them ever since. So that's a pretty long time. But I prefer, my favorite lacrosse ones are the Arrowhead Sport model.
Yeah.
That's the one I like. Just a little bit more comfortable for me.
Those are like knee-high Crocs. They're amazing.
Yeah. And then I think you got them. They just came out with deck boots now. Yep. And freaking love those. I've been wearing those nonstop since getting those. And that'll be my in-between hunts boot that I'll be wearing all fall. So when I'm not actually hunting, I'll be wearing those deck boots, kicking them on and off, slip-ons. Super nice.
Do you wear those fishing?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally wear them for everything except hiking or hunting. Otherwise, I'll be in my deck boots. I don't wear anything fancy otherwise. You mentioned the decoy. You're using that Dave Smith doe decoy. Have you done the buck decoy yet?
I don't have a buck decoy. And I know we own that company. I know they're expensive, but their products are so good. Like if you never used them for turkey hunting, there's nothing that I have bought for turkey hunting that changed like the arc of my turkey hunting life. The way that when I bought that Dave Smith flock, like when you're for bow hunting and taking kids, it was like a whole new world opened up for me. And then I feel the same thing happened last year when my little girl shot that buck on that decoy, and then I took it out, killed a buck off the decoy, and I was like, these products, they look so good. I mean, they're less portable than a lot of the competitors' products because they're built to have
not made for that.
Right. They have a certain body language look to them, and there's like a concession you make there. So, and that's part of the reason I like the doe decoy, because carrying that doe decoy is different. That buck decoy is a beast, but the doe decoy is, it's not that bad to carry, and it's comparable to like a lot of other full body decoys, but it looks so freaking good. And even when you have does come out and check them out, like you can kind of gauge the effectiveness of a decoy by what the does do, and it's just like, they just accept them more, and the end of the season, I was over in Wisconsin, and I only run hen decoys by the end of the season, usually the last 2 weeks. And I got some photos of a buck that came out sniffing my hen decoy. And that's 2 years in a row I photographed deer, like walking directly up to my decoys and sniffing them instead of just going, like turning inside out. And so I'm a huge fan of their stuff.
Yeah. I only got to use my buck decoy a handful of times last year, but did not have any does freak out on it, like you said, and had younger bucks just hanging out around it. Very curious. So that was interesting, and can't wait to give it more of a shot this year.
Dude, I just applied for Iowa, and I'm going to point to the stands and call my shot. I'm going to go kill a big one on public land with that decoy in Iowa this year. Like
nice.
When I think about the exciting plans that I have for this fall, like for myself, not with my daughters, like that's the one where I'm like, I think this is going to be my ticket to killing a really big deer on public land in Iowa, and I cannot wait to use it.
I can't wait to hear the story. And on that note, we do need to wrap it up. We'll touch on other gear categories again later in the year. I'm sure we'll find some excuse to talk through some stuff coming down the road. But thanks, buddy. Appreciate you taking some time here, talking gear, talking through this stuff. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I want to reemphasize the very important point we made at the beginning, which is that you don't need any of the stuff me and Tony talked about. You don't need to spend $1 million on this stuff. Get out there, have fun with whatever you've got. If you can make a couple upgrades, great, but don't let that take away from your enjoyment and your fulfillment in hunting and learning and getting better at the craft. All of that is number one priority. All that said, appreciate you. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.